Hey cuties, I'm Miles Sexton, a content creator, activist, and loud and proud disruptor of the norm. On Our Private Bits, we talk about the things and people that don't get talked about enough, or at all. Trust me, as a sober, HIV-positive, non-binary person, I would know. Join me as I chat with people in my life and from around the world whose stories deserve to be heard. Maybe you'll learn something new, and you will definitely LOL. Our Private Bits is also part of the Acast Curator Network. All right, cuties. Today on Our Private Bits, we have Mr. Hugo Filipe, who is a content creator, creative director, and photographer. He has worked with brands such as Campbell's, H&M, Fable, IKEA, Adidas, and so many more, and also happens to be one of my friends. Want to say hi, Hugo?
Hello, I'm Hugo.
I'm so happy that we get to do this episode together. You know, I feel like we've known each other for a really long time, but we've never really had this vulnerable sort of moment together.
No.
So I don't know. I'm really excited to get to know you a bit deeper.
It's been a minute, I think, too. Yeah.
So what is your what's your version of how we first met? I'm curious.
I think we were talking on Instagram.
Yes.
And then we were just like, let's hang out.
Totally.
We met at your office.
Yeah, L'Oreal. Okay.
Yeah. And then I think we hung out. And then I think we made plans to hang out later or something.
Yes.
Did we do that though?
I think didn't we go for dinner or we went for something after a coffee or something like that?
I think
afterwards?
Okay.
Yeah.
My memory's awful. So,
No. I feel like that was a whole other lifetime ago.
Was, 2018?
Yes,
maybe.
Who knows?
Yeah,
maybe even later.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was back when I was working for Lancôme. So you came to the L'Oreal office here in Toronto,
downtown, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
On Richmond Street.
Okay, I remember.
Yeah.
I remember the overarching details, not the little stuff. But
I love it. What were your first impressions of I guess meeting me for the first time? I'm curious.
I think I feel like back then,
yes,
the internet was so different where we sort of weren't as, I don't want to say authentic, but It was more of the image.
Yes.
So I don't know if I had an idea of who you were.
Yeah.
But I think it would not be what I would think now if I met you on the internet first. Do you know what I mean?
For sure.
And I feel because it was back in we didn't do videos.
No,
it was just all
pictures,
professional imagery, yes. Which you were already modeling. Yeah, it was back then. So I feel I was just okay, I've got this boss bitch that I'm meeting. You know what I mean? I would the hair always. So
yeah, I feel I had my mohawk back then too. It was my shaved on the sides and long on the top. Yeah. You actually got to meet baby Miles. You know,
it was a different time. So
it's so true. I remember distinctly from our first conversation. We were I was just I don't know. We got onto the topic of something because I was totally okay, this guy's got this daddy vibes. I was he's so hot. You know, I definitely feel I was internet crushing a bit on you back then.
I feel we also, I don't know if I'm making this up, but we both just went through a breakup.
Yes, we did.
I remember I remember us talking about that.
Yeah,
and that was,
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, because that was my fresh to Toronto phase post breakup. So I think we were just in such different places back then.
Totally, we were. Agreed. But it was you were one of the first content creators though that I actually met in real life, which is kind of interesting. I don't know. I think back then I was so afraid to reach out and
meet people,
look for community. Yeah. I think that you're a part of, and also events were very different then too. There wasn't a lot of these big massive content creator events, and
it's true.
So I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting how and I feel you gave me a lot of advice too, in that first time.
Okay.
You know, I feel in terms of I was still trying to get my toe wet in the content creator world. So
okay.
I feel you were helping to guide me a bit in a direction of working with brands. So I
good.
appreciated that. Yeah, I feel it was.
Okay.
I'm doing it full time now. So it's
we're both still here. So
yeah.
Okay.
That's cool. But how did you get into being a content creator? Did the photography and the creative direction come first, or did that come after?
It all kind of happened. Okay. I have a terrible, my story of how I got into this is not the best story.
That's okay.
But it's a perseverance story, I'll say.
But that's good.
So I was working at a marketing agency, and I was working there when we met.
Yes.
And I got hired for SEO, and then they launched a social media division, and that would like became sort of where I was working. And we had a client that wanted influencers. And at that time, like it was, again, like 2016, 17, like it was like a whole new world. And when the client reached out, I was just like, I don't even know what that is. Like, you know, I think my Instagram at that point was just like bad pictures of my food and like, you know what I mean? Like a normal Instagram, like I was just using it day to day. And so I like looked into it, and then we started reaching out to all these content creators in Toronto, and like people were responding with these rates, and I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like this is like my salary.
Yeah,
for
people
like
have no idea how much content creators make.
Yeah, and this was still back in like where budgets were smaller.
Totally.
And I was just like, whoa, like this is literally like what I make in a week, like or like a month for some of these people. And I think at that time I looked over to like some of my colleagues and I was like, I could do this. Like I could be a content creator. And they're like, no, you can't. And I was like, you cannot tell me I can't do something. Yeah. And I went home that Friday and I completely just like took the whole weekend. I like rebranded myself. I like made my logo, decided on like Mr. Hugo Filipe, changed my handle. I called one of my photographer friends and we booked a photo shoot.
Yeah.
I think on the Sunday we went out, I just like brought all my clothes and we just like went to all the cool spots in Toronto.
Yeah.
And I think like literally I came back Monday and I was like, all right, now we're starting, like we're posting the content. And then I just decided that I was going to share more and like become a content creator. And I know that's so weird to say, just be like, I just decided I wanted to do this. But it started as like I don't want to say like a fuck you to my coworkers, but like, you know, like I can do this.
Yeah.
And then it turned into what it is now.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I did it. I did it like, I don't want to say in a spiteful way, but like, you know what, like in that, like, I'll show you, but I think it was worth it. And I think sometimes you need that. I think sometimes you need people to tell you no for you to be able to like show them, you know what I mean? And sort of persevere past that. I'm very much that kind of person when it comes to something. If you tell me like I can't do it, I'll figure it out. Or like if someone wants to hire me for a project and I don't know how to do it, I'll be like, yeah, of course. I've totally done that. And then I'll just go learn it. And I think that was one of those moments. And that's sort of what started the whole thing.
I love it. I mean, I totally relate to that. I think like I'm so the same. Like I hate when people tell me no or like tell me that I can't do something or like reject me from like something. I feel like that's also been like the story of my career of like, you know, I grew up in a small little farming town in Nova Scotia. And people are like, you're never going to be a model. You're never going to work in the fashion industry. You know, you're going to be like working at this grocery store for the rest of your life. And I was like, watch me, you know? So
sometimes you need that.
Totally. And I think people have to like, you know, I think it's like you said, I think you have a choice. You can either like take people saying those things and like use it to like your detriment, or you can like use it as motivation and 100%. Fire and drive. And
100%.
I think like people should, you know, I think you have a choice, and I hope people realize that.
And I think like it wasn't unrealistic for me to do those things anyways. Like I took photography in high school. I took creative writing in high school. I also had both classes in college when I went to school. So like it was always, I've always been creative, and maybe I just didn't realize that that was an outlet to be creative and to make money.
Yes.
So I think it wasn't far off. And I think that that's one of the things that I feel like as a content creator, like you have to enjoy those things. You have to enjoy creating.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So it sort of made sense. But I think the start was very much rooted in trying to prove people wrong. So
100%.
I mean, even now, I feel like sometimes I do things now as a way to try to prove people wrong, even with content creation.
Totally.
So it's always full circle, I feel like.
Agreed. It's been beautiful watching your sort of like evolution and growth,
changing.
I think, on social media. It's good.
It's so different. Like,
yes.
I look back at like what I was doing when I started and like sort of my journey on social media to here. And it's, I mean, like, even like you, like we're so different now.
Yeah. I mean, I wish, you know, the days were back, some days where I could just post a picture of my shoes and get like 100,000 likes because people like my shoes, because that took me like 5 seconds. You know, now it's like full production for like a 15-second video, you know?
It took me so long, and like I'm just finally starting to do TikToks.
Yes.
Because as like a photographer, like the idea of doing video was so daunting.
Totally.
And even just like when it comes to photography, like we can play around with it for so long to get that like one shot and to get it perfect. And I think that's something we taught ourselves in like the early days of Instagram, like getting that perfect shot, where like video, it's a lot more work to get that perfect
100%.
shot.
Lighting is so crucial.
Lighting, like if I don't like something about myself, I can't just put it into Photoshop and fix it. Like you gotta learn to let go of all that. And I think that's been the hardest part for me. Like I think I pushed it off for so long.
Yeah.
Like there's so many days where I was like, I just hope this TikTok thing is a fad, or like I hope video is a fad because I don't want to do it. And now 2024 is like my goal to actually start doing it. So
what was the thing that like you had to let go of the most?
I think the perfectionism, especially like being a full-time photographer, I do these photo shoots and like sometimes I spend an hour or 2 hours on a single photo. I think like letting go of that on video for myself is the hard part. I think it's what I'm still struggling with. And I think it's like normal, you know, like today I'm like, one of these sides I have these like pimples and I'm like, I can't, like if we hadn't committed to this and this was just like a video that I was shooting today for something, I would have probably not shot today and like shot tomorrow.
Totally. I mean, that's probably a big one for me too. Like I still have pretty problematic skin that like still likes to break out. And I'm like, I cannot Photoshop this out of my pictures like anymore. And I've just like, it's really like taken me a long time to like come to peace with like, this is a normal part of being human. And like, I have to just like accept it. But yeah, perfectionism I think is like, it's a tough one because it's so like deeply like rooted, I think in not only I think just like people, but like especially as queer people, like we are constantly, I think, like trying to like avoid any sort of like judgment, you know, and maybe we subconsciously we may not realize that's happening. Yeah. But it's like, you know, it's like any little thing can just like activate that. I think like that perfectionism to just like try to avoid
totally
those comments.
No, it's I think it also is something that like we taught ourselves when it was more photo based, you know what I mean? To like look for that perfection. And like back when I think it's fair to say Instagram used to be like an aspirational
100%.
for, you know, a lot of people. It was like you're following creators who like you want to be like, whereas now I feel like we follow creators that we relate to and that we sort of like see ourselves with.
Huge shift.
I think back then it was also part of that. Let's make everything look perfect. Let's remove every wrinkle off the clothes and Photoshop our faces and do whatever. You know what I mean? If I don't like that little thing, I can just fix it. But those days are gone.
They are.
And I think it's for the better.
100%.
But it's still a process to learn how to get past that.
Of course. It's an unlearning, right? So I'm curious though, this is something I actually don't know about you, but were you born in Toronto?
No.
No. Okay.
I'm originally from Portugal.
Okay. Oh, cool.
Yeah, I was born there and then I moved.
What part of Portugal?
San Miguel.
Okay.
It's like one of the islands, the Azores Islands.
I want to go.
It's so nice. If you go for like a couple of days, at least like there's, I think 9 islands. So you can travel between the islands and stuff.
Oh, amazing.
So last time I went was 2018 because it was my grandma's 50th wedding anniversary. So it was nice. Like they were doing like vow renewal and stuff like that. Yeah. And I was there for a week and a half. And after day 3, I was just like, I can't. Like there's nothing else to do because the island's so small.
Yes. Can you not sit still?
I can't.
Yeah, me either.
No, I'm even now, I'm like, I have to stay here for 30 minutes. Like my ADHD is kicking out.
I know, right.
But yeah, I went for a week and a half-ish and it was just a little bit too long. Like after sort of like going back and looking at all the different places I grew up in, it was just kind of like, all right, like
what's next?
What's next? And obviously like, I like to do queer things. So in a small island, there isn't really, I think there's one gay bar, but it's like gay friendly bar. You know what I mean? So I didn't do any of that. I went by myself. I just went with family. So I didn't even have anyone to go with.
Yeah.
But I think now, like, I want to go back and like experience it sort of on my own terms. And I think everyone should.
Totally.
And then Portugal's right there. So just go with Portugal and then do Portugal.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
That's so cool. So what made you move to Toronto then?
So I grew up in a small town. Like the town I grew up in doesn't even exist anymore.
No way.
It's on the side of a volcano. And I think like it was right before I went to see my grandparents. So like 2016, 17, the government came in and was like, just knocked on everyone's doors and was like, here's a check for the value of your house.
Yes.
Where we have reports the volcano is going to erupt. So if anything happens, like no one's coming. You can take this check and buy another home the size of your home somewhere else on the island, or you can stay and keep the money.
Yes.
But if something happens, like no one's coming. Like they were very clear, like we're giving you the money, do what you want with it.
Whoa.
But that's sort of it. So most people like left. My grandparents left. They like bought a house in a different town.
Okay.
You know? But there are some people that stayed there. But it was a small town, and my mom just wanted more for me, which is, the like immigrant story, I think, for the most part. So we moved to Canada. We sort of bounced around a lot. We had different family in like different small towns.
Okay.
And then I think I've just always wanted something bigger. Like I went to Western after school. So like went to London, and then I think Toronto was just the next like natural progression. I think also as like queer people, we try to gravitate to where there's more queer people.
Absolutely.
And I think Toronto, obviously in Canada, is like our spot.
Yes.
So I think that it just was a natural progression for me to come to Toronto. But I love having things around me. Like I love the hustle and bustle of the city. And I think maybe growing up in a small town, like you understand that there's like nothing that you can do.
No.
So I think for me, like having everything around me is great. Like I love never, like if I'm bored, it's my own fault. You know what I mean? Like there's so many things to do.
There's so much to do in Toronto.
So I think it was, just natural progression for myself. And I think just I'm more comfortable in the city where I can just see more people that I feel like are like me.
Totally. When was like the first time, I guess, like, so after, I'm assuming like after you moved to Ontario, like, do you remember seeing like queerness for the first time, or like maybe you saw it back home? I don't know.
I don't, I'm trying to think of like, when we moved, we settled down in Port Colborne. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's like near St. Catharines Welland area. And I had like some queer people in like my high school and in like the elementary school I went to. Cool. So I think I saw it, and I think I've known I was gay. I think since I came out, you know? And I mean like came out. But and I think it was one of those things that like everyone knew, but no one really talked about it. So I identified other queer people, I think, very early on. I think if we know early, it's easier for us to sort of pull those things out from people. But it wasn't necessarily like a safe space, if that makes sense. And I think I didn't really bond with those queer people either. I don't know if you had this experience, but it was almost like that like high school competition.
Totally.
With the other
I felt
queer
so
kids.
threatened by the other ones.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say like my high school bully was the other like out queer kid, you know? And I think it was part of the like projection maybe.
Totally.
And I was also weird. Like I was weird. I was adjusting to a lot. Like I had come to a new country. I was in this town where everybody was white. And like even I'm white, but like I was the darkest person in my class.
Totally.
So I think like just being that like immigrant kid, you know, like I'm half Portuguese, half Egyptian. Like some people immediately see like the brownness from that, and they just like, you know, put me into that. Like had a lot of like go back to your country, like, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I think it made it very difficult for me to make friends in grade school, and I brought that into high school. And I think I still, some of those things still sort of like live in my head, but it sort of always kept that barrier. So I think that's why even when I was in London, Ontario, like I think that was where the first gay club, Lavish. I don't even know if that still exists. And that's where I first started to see people, and I was like, I need more of this. Like I need to go to Toronto and actually experience more of that.
I love it. Yeah. Well, I think it is. It's important. And it's the same reason I feel like I came here too. It was like I needed a place where I felt like safe, so I could like figure out like who I was, you know, because I think like when you're so much thinking about like your safety, you know, when you're in these sort of like situations, so, you know, even regardless, like, you know, London is, you know, quite a big population, but it's still like, you know, I think from like even just like a race perspective, like there's still not a lot of diversity there.
Like
so
London, London is not very great. But no, Toronto, I think is like, Toronto's great.
For sure.
Yeah.
So now I guess like, now you're like working as a content creator, you know, you're like living in Toronto, or I guess you were like more creative direction or in photography at that point. So like, how was, I guess, like navigating, I guess, like your like queerness, I think like within the work that you're doing? Because I think like that was one thing I think I always, I think I just appreciated with you on social media, is that I never felt like I never was like, oh, this person's like, you're not queer, even though you're more masculine presenting. Like I felt like you were always like, you know, showing your partner or whatever, like on social media. So how was that for you at that time?
I've tried to like never hide, you know, but I've never been like also, I mean, like I've been vocal, but it's never been like I think I've always kept a little barrier there because, you know, I think we still struggle with people being negative.
Yes.
And queerness is one of the things that
Totally.
always comes out that people love to, you know.
Yeah.
So I think I've always kept sort of like a little bit of a barrier there, or like again, like I overthink what I'm putting out
Mm-hmm.
in a way that like I'm like, okay, how can someone, and this is maybe not just to be about queerness, but like how can someone make fun of me with this
Yes.
content I'm putting out, right?
Totally.
And I think it's like that's something I'm also learning to let go of. Like I think now I don't care as much about what people think or post or respond.
For sure.
But I've never tried to hide it. And if it comes up organically, then it comes up, you know? I've always just wanted to like show myself and like what I'm doing and my work and my story. But I do think that there are times where I like try and not share as many of those things because like I said, like afraid of what people are going to say. And I think even myself, like this is just a very weird thing for me, but I hate when people like me as a content creator, like I hate being defined as just like one thing. And I think like even queer, like even when it comes to that, like I don't want to be just like a queer content creator, you know? And I think if that's part of what people do, I don't, you know, that's you and that's your story and that's what you want to do. I don't really care. But I think for me, like I'm Hugo, I'm all these things. I'm queer, I'm a photographer, I'm a dog dad, like I'm, you know what I mean? Like, and I try not to, I tried a lot not to make content that would define me as that.
For sure.
And I didn't want to be, you know, only getting picked for campaigns or for things because I'm like the token queer person.
Yes.
And I think for a while, I really tried to push that aside. I think now I don't care. I think now, you know what, if you want to hire me for a campaign because I am the queer person, like give me the money. I'll take the money. I do think there are still some things that happen. Like there are those brands that only come knocking during June. You know what I mean? And like, I'm sure you have a lot of that.
For sure.
And you're like, I'm here year round, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that that is the part that still sort of like makes me feel shitty when it's like, there's certain brands that every June, like I've worked with you for 3-4 years, you know, and that's great. Every June you keep me, you keep my pockets full, but I'm a person the other 11 months of the year, you know? And I think that sometimes when I think about that, I try and like not push aside my queerness, but like not include so much of it because I want to feel like I'm being hired for me. You know what I mean?
I think there's more to us than like the people that we date, right? And so there's definitely a lot of like tokenizing that happens, you know, which is frustrating.
But I think I'm pushing past that a little bit and I'm like, you know what? Hire me. Don't, you know? And I think I've become more comfortable sharing my queerness throughout things. I think there are still sometimes things where like that something comes in and I'm like, this is great. I can be as queer as I want, but then like, who's going to see this? You know, especially if they talk about like running ads with our content, I immediately start to be like, all right, who's going to see this? What can I and can't I do to like protect myself and, you know, and my mental health? Because during June of last year, I did a big Pride campaign. And, you know, the company was talking about all these things they were going to do and they're going to push all these ads and they were going to, you know, send all this stuff out. And in my head, I'm like, who's going to see this? Like you're like a brand that appeals to everybody.
Yes.
So it's like, queer people will see this, but then people who hate queer people will also see this. And that ended up happening. They boosted a lot of ads. And there was like a video on TikTok that I think like hit almost 1 million, but it was just like through the boosting and stuff. And I would say like 95% of comments were people telling me that I was going to go to hell and I should kill myself and like all of these things. And, you know, I had a talk with the brand way before that. And I was like, if these things happen, like, what are we doing? Like, what is the protocol for, you know? And the protocol was just, okay, we'll turn the comments off, which like cool. But like at the same time, you know, I wish that brands would be like, no, we're going to back you up and we're going to say that's not acceptable, you know, that, you know, we support everybody, you know, that kind of stuff. But it was just more of like the hiding, which was fine. I understand from a brand perspective that there's a lot of politics and you can't respond to the 500 comments and tell everyone to, you know, go fuck themselves. But I think there are times where that still pops up in my head.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, like, I think I admire that you have the foresight because I think like for me in the past, I don't know, I'm like in my bubble online and then like, I had like a video kind of similar. It was like 10 million on TikTok, but it was just like everyone telling me that they wanted to murder me, and it's just like, I wasn't like mentally or like prepared to like deal with that I basically like avoided TikTok for like the last year because I was like, I don't know if I can go through this again.
It gets to you. And even if you know not to care, I think when you have so many people telling you these things, like it still fucks with your head.
Totally.
You know?
And I think it's like, I think it activates a lot of like, it's like a trauma response, like I think like even though you can feel really good and confident in where you are now, I think that there's still always going to be that part of like that part of yourself that was traumatized at one point in your life
by
or being bullied,
things.
right?
Yeah.
And so then like when you have the 10 million people like coming at you, it's like, of course it's going to activate it.
100%.
Like I think it's hard to not like feel something from that, So yeah.
I think the part that gets me is it's even if the content isn't queer, it's just that you're existing.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I like the ads that I did, they were for Pride Month, but it was for a streaming service, and it was literally just like, hey, you can find all these queer movies on the streaming service. Like it wasn't anything, like I wasn't doing anything gay. You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
Like I understand sometimes if you see content and it triggers something in people, but we're just existing. And I think that that's the part for me where it's like, you're telling me all these things literally because I just said, go watch these gay movies.
For sure.
It's Pride Month. Educate yourself.
Yes.
Here's a list of stuff. And I don't think like that's where I was just like, well, it got to me,
And I think, like when I hear a lot of people say like, is pride necessary? Are these things kind of like, why do we still have this? Like, it's fine now. And I think it's like, no, like you still also like live in this bubble when it's like, maybe you're not seeing as much of it, maybe like on the streets, but like there's still like a massive community of people online that like still feel like empowered
100%.
to say these very like hateful things.
Yeah.
So, there obviously is still a lot of work to be done.
People love to hide behind the keyboard.
Yeah.
About anything. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done.
100%. Now, I know, like, I guess, like, sort of on this kind of topic, I remember it was like a few years ago when you kind of like publicly came out a little bit about, being in a trouple and like, what was like, honestly, when I saw that, I feel like I have to tell you, like, I had like a whole new like level of like respect for you because I think it's not something that's like publicly talked about, and I was like, I really like applauded you for doing that because I think there is like so much stigma outside of like a very like colonial idea of what a relationship should look like.
Right.
So I guess like what made you want to publicly talk about that like online?
I think there was a couple things. I think at first, I like obviously any relationship that's new, you're not right away sharing everything. So I think there was a bit of time where I wasn't, sharing or like was sharing things, but it wasn't really clear to people, that I was in this relationship.
Yes.
I think over time, when I first decided that we were going to try the throuple relationship, or I guess when we decided, it was just me. It's in my head. No, when we decided, there was a lot of, we'll call it research, you know, and Googling. I know someone else that's in a throuple in Toronto. So I asked him to have coffee and I went through, all these questions. And he also gave me some really great insight on like, why are you doing this? Here's some, things that are going to happen. And then, but I think a lot of it was figuring it out on my own. And I think that that's sort of why I was like, I'm going to share more of this because if there's anyone else that's sort of like considering this or, just wants to learn more, like there isn't really resources. There are some other great accounts. I feel like when I did a lot of research, it was more like, I guess there's no like straight throuples, but it was a lot of like one guy and two girls and stuff. So I think even just like a queer throuple, like the 3 gay men, like was interesting for me to want to share information.
Totally.
And I think like, if you are already gay or okay with me being queer and gay, like you're probably fine with learning that content anyways. So I think my audience, like, I don't think anyone really cared.
Okay.
I think a lot of people were interested.
Yeah.
I think some people were interested in like also a gossipy kind of way, which like whatever.
Yeah.
But I think people were just supportive. I don't think I had anyone that was like very outward or like negative about it.
I
think that, and again, it's part of like the community that you sort of build. And maybe there are some people that were turned off about it, but
Mm-hmm.
no one's ever really said anything to me. I think everybody was sort of super supportive, even like outside of Instagram, like
Mm-hmm.
people in real life. I think it was just it's a big difference in a relationship versus just like two people.
Yeah,
There's so many more dynamics.
exactly.
Um, and I just wanted to share a bit of that. And I think I get people that ask me questions all the time still.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think for the most part, I try and be like open book about what's going on in my life or like what I'm doing. So I think it just like it made sense. And because I have more of like a lifestyle account, it
Yeah,
just like it was even if I didn't want to share it, like it was gonna be shared about because
totally.
I'm just doing these things with two other people all the time. So
Yeah, because
it's
did it reach like a point where like you were like, oh, like I'm posting this person and like people maybe are wondering why we're all together, or like what was the
I think there was a bit of that at
yeah.
first, but I think if you knew if you know me in real life, like
Mm-hmm.
outside of Instagram, like we were
Yeah,
always together anyways.
totally.
So it wasn't, I don't think that there was like a time where it was weird. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like there was no like period where people I think were like, why are they all hanging out together? Because we
Mm-hmm.
already were. It was just like a
Yeah,
natural progression to our friendship. And I think that that's what was really beautiful about it.
love
It
it.
was just three really good friends that decided there's maybe more there and that
Yeah.
we wanted to experience that and explore that. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that it didn't feel jarring or random for a lot of people.
Totally.
Like I don't think there was anyone in our life that was like, "What? Like you guys
Yeah.
are, like I think it sort of made sense." And I think that's what was great.
Ah, that makes me so happy to
Yeah.
hear this.
Yeah.
So what do you find like I guess, you say like a lot of people had questions and like what are like sort of maybe those like frequently asked questions or like the advice that people are sort of
Right.
seeking um if they were like looking to get into one that you would give them?
I think a lot of people wanted to know why, and I
Yeah.
think
Oh,
that like
interesting.
that's a big like is one person not enough? Like I
Yeah.
think that that's sort of a thought that a lot of people have
Yeah.
or
That's
is something going on in your relationship that you're trying to fix.
yeah.
And I think and that was some questions
Interesting.
that even like the friend that I met,
Yes.
he asked me right away, like, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Is there, is this to fill a gap or any of that
Mhm.
stuff? And the answer was no. Like it was just we were hanging out, the three of us, 4 or 5 times a week
Yeah.
already. Like he was staying over usually on weekends.
Yeah.
It was a natural progression.
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of people didn't understand that
Totally.
it sort of just happened.
But I also
Um,
think it's like one person putting so much pressure on one person to like fill the needs of
of
like of for
yeah,
you. I think that's a lot of pressure in a
it
relationship. And
is.
it's
It
like
is.
and especially if you don't have a strong like friend group that can like maybe take on a little bit
Yeah.
of like the weight of
Yeah.
like that. I think that's why a lot of people I think get divorced or like don't
Yeah.
have healthy relationships
Yeah.
because it's like they project so much onto that
To
one
one
person and
person.
want them to fill every single part of who they
Yeah.
are. And I don't know. I don't know if that's something that I believe in.
Yeah. I think I learned a lot from that
Hmm.
in terms of that too, because
Yeah.
even like, I've mentioned this to you before, but I
Yes.
don't really like talking about people to other people.
Yes.
So even when I'm in a relationship, like I have a really hard time talking to my friends
Mhm.
about my
For
partner
sure.
because I never want my friends to feel weird around my
Yeah.
partner. And I think like even that's something that like I sort of learned was like having different friend groups and people that don't really mix together because then
Mhm.
if you do talk about your partner or you do want to talk to someone about something,
Yeah.
that person isn't gonna be affected by that.
Totally.
Like they're removed from your friends.
Yes.
So I really understood like the importance of having your own friends and
Mhm.
your own friend group that's separate sort of from your relationship. And
Yes.
I think that sort of ties back into what you're saying, like
Mhm.
being able to have different people in your life that can fill some of those needs.
For sure.
Um, but I think I've seen personally, like, I think because I was sharing about the throuple, there I had a
Yes.
lot of people asking me questions and
Yeah.
telling me things. And I did sort of notice, not necessarily a pattern, but there were a lot of people who like were considering it, but it was
Mhm.
like because they were missing something from their
Yeah.
current relationship, which I think is fine. I think that there's, like we've mentioned, like one
Yes.
person can't be everything, but I think I do strongly feel like if you're trying to fix something in a relationship, like it's
Mhm.
not necessarily the best
For
route to do
sure.
it. I think you need to fix that first before introducing
Exactly.
something new.
100%.
I think for us, like the natural sort of progression
Mhm.
of our friendship turning into that
Yeah.
made a lot of sense. And I feel like that is probably like, if I was to be in a throuple again, like that's how it would be approached. Like it would just be a relationship that sort of evolved into that.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that that's how people should look at it if they're looking at,
Totally.
doing that. Like it's not just, all right, my partner travels half the month, so the other half I want. So, you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
it's not sort of like to fill that, in my opinion.
Yes.
And I think if I was ever to approach it in that way, like it wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just like three people falling in love together as opposed to just two and then bringing someone else,
Totally.
Yeah.
But I think that's really good advice because I think it's like, yeah, you can't use a third person as a band-aid,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it's like, that's temporary. And
Yeah.
agreed. You need to kind of like make sure that you work on the relationship and it is in a good place to like allow someone else to maybe come into
Yeah.
it. So
I think my biggest sort of full advice is just to understand that there is multiple relationships. And I
Mhm.
don't just mean like there's like 5 relationships.
Yeah.
Because there's your relationship with each individual person,
Yes.
and then there's your group dynamics.
Yeah.
And then those people also have relationships. And then you also have your relationship with yourself that you need to figure out,
Totally.
how all of this sort of works together. So I think it's a bit more complex than people
Mhm.
assume it is.
Of course.
And I think that there's a lot of that no one can really teach you.
Totally.
And you just sort of have to live it to sort of understand how you
Mhm.
manage all those relationships. And that there's no longer, when you're dating one person, you're prioritizing one person.
Yes.
But when you're dating multiple people and you guys are equals, and I
Mhm.
know that, when it comes to thruples, there's different dynamics. There's some
Yes.
people who are, we're here and then the new person's here.
Yeah.
Like we were very clear that our dynamic was a very equal relationship
Yes.
and we were starting a new relationship,
Mhm.
not necessarily building a relationship.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean?
Totally.
So I think that was the difficult part, was learning how to sort of everyone, like not be equal, but balance everyone's
Yeah.
relationship. Because I think that what sort of made it really difficult, um, and that's sort of what sort of developed into the
Mhm.
progression of it ending, was just that like dynamically, the way that we spent time together was so different that it
Mhm.
would never be equal.
Yes.
Because like 2 of us work together. So like
Yeah.
we're together during the day working,
More.
and then we come home, and now the 3 of us are together, but the
Totally.
2 of us have already had 5, 6, 7, 8 hours
Yeah.
together. So there wasn't a way to sort of even out that dynamic
Mhm.
of someone feeling left out.
Totally.
And that's sort of something that you learn, you know, as you sort of develop the relationship. And that's something we thought would change once we all
Mhm.
moved in together,
Yeah.
because we're like, okay, we're all together, we see each other all the time.
Mhm.
But it still didn't change the overall dynamic of, 2 of us are going to work, we're together at work all day.
Yes.
And then when we come home, now it's the 3 of us, but it's still, yeah, that didn't change. And that's you, we tried it and it didn't work.
Mhm.
But we are glad that we tried it and we are
Yeah.
glad that we experienced that.
Totally.
Um, and I think it's great if you're able to. I've always been like a community person.
Mhm.
So like, I know it sounds weird, but like, I love that idea, just having multiple people at home that you love and that you
Totally.
sort of depend on. And I think it's really beautiful. And I think I've seen some great successful
Mhm.
relationships out of it. Um, it didn't work out.
No, and you know what? I think regardless of the outcome, I think you all, I'm sure, learned so much
Yeah.
and grew so much. I think as individuals,
Yeah.
and that is, I think, like irreplaceable.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that type of growth, and yeah, I mean, like hearing you talk a lot about it. It's not something I've ever talked about, but after I was in a long term relationship and it ended, and there was like a couple that I kind of had a crush
Yeah.
on online, ended up flying to Scotland to
Okay.
just spend some time with them. And so it was like, we weren't in a relationship, but it was like my first time sort of being like a third in someone else's relationship for
Right.
like an extended period of time.
Right.
And yeah, like it was, to me, I was like, oh, it's just going to be fun,
Right.
but it was like, it was a lot of emotions to manage.
Yeah.
And even though, what we had was like 3 weeks, together
Right.
that we spent together, it was like, I definitely, I learned a lot about myself and just like how much emotions I had to sort of manage between each person and the type of like dynamic you have with each individual
Yeah.
person. And like, I don't know, I think it's like I think for some people, it's like sometimes it's like this fantasy idea, and
100%.
like, and then you get in the situation. It's like, okay, no, this is not like the porn.
No,
you know?
it's really not. It's not.
It is like there's way more to it. And I was like, okay, like, yes, I would be open to something like that. I think like, whatever my future holds, but like, at that sort of time, freshly out of a breakup, it was like really hard on me to like go into like a dynamic like that. So like it didn't really like take off, but
I mean, you tried it.
Yeah,
and
totally.
You got to experience and you got to see that. And I think that is important as well.
Absolutely. I mean, hey, I don't regret it. I still had a great 3 weeks with them, but my heart was just like, I was like, I don't know how to manage my heart in a situation like this. So yeah. So to sort of like wrap up, I just want to appreciate you so much to being open about talking about this. I think it's like such a powerful piece to this episode, and we haven't had someone share this type of story on the podcast. So I'm just like, want you to know how grateful I am.
Thanks.
But where can people find you online to continue following your journey?
Yeah, I'm Mr. Hugo Filipe on everything. So just MR and then Hugo Filipe. Instagram, TikTok, hopefully. We'll see. I'm trying. Mainly Instagram though, but I'm sure like they'll find you. They'll find you. From you. So it's I try to keep everything the same.
Love it.
Easy to find.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.